Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first installment of our 2024 ORBA webinar series. I'm Chris Lorenz, Vice Chair of ORBA, the Ohio River Way Basin Alliance. On behalf of Craig Butler, our Chair, we'd like to thank you for joining us. We'd also like to thank our sponsors listed on the first slide there. We appreciate their support, in particular Orsenco and for the Foundation for Ohio River Education for sponsoring this webinar and working out the mechanics. We also like to acknowledge and thank the ORBA working group called KID, Knowledge for Informed Decisions, chaired by Jen Bowman at Ohio University, along with Heather Sprouse, Heather Mayfield, Chuck Somerville, and Nick Callahan. They put together this discussion series, each of which will occur at the last Wednesday of each month. So we'll have a February and a March webinar as well. Like I said, I'm Chris Lorenz, Vice Chair of ORBA. I have the pleasure of introducing today's speakers, who are Heather Sprouse with West Virginia Coalition, Tanner Yes with Groundwork Ohio River Valley, and Jordan Lebekin with the National Wildlife Federation. Beyond his work with the National Wildlife Federation, Jordan chairs a working group for healthy and productive ecosystems, and along with the Clean Abundant Water Working Group, are working on a major restoration plan for the basin. And we're going to hear some of the process of that, in particular today's topic, which is talking about community benefits of Ohio River restoration. Jordan is the director of the Ohio River Restoration for the National Wildlife Federation. He also serves as communication director for the Healing Our Waters Great Lakes Coalition. Prior to joining National Wildlife Federation, Jordan served as a reporter and editor at community newspapers around the country. He oversaw marketing and development efforts at Toledo Jazz Society and gained media for Nonpartisan Americans Discuss Social Security based in Washington, D.C. Jordan earned a degree in English from Case Western Reserve University. He's going to start us off. I'll intervene for the next speaker, Heather, and give a little more about her background, and then finally Tanner. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And if you want to put any questions or comments in the chat, please feel free to do so. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for the introduction. Thank you for ORBA, Orsenco, Heather, and Tanner, co-presenters today. And I'm going to start off just by sharing just a few pictures, sort of, as the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'm just going to sort of go through a little bit of visually what you can. This is what we're about to talk about today. We're talking about community engagement, community involvement, democracy in action, and how we can make sure that we are standing up for communities, for their clean water values, for their recreational values, for their public health values. And so these are sort of, we'll talk about the listening sessions we conducted. We'll talk about what we learned from them. We'll talk about where this process is going. And we'll talk about how all of us have an important role to play in restoring and protecting all the waters of the 14th state Ohio River Basin. So while we're here today, again, Jordan Lebekin with the National Wildlife Federation, NWF, is truly a federation. We're a national environmental group with 50 state and territorial affiliates. And our common goal is to protect and restore wildlife habitat, protect and restore our wild environmental resources for people, for fish and wildlife, for communities, and all of this, the people who call this planet home. Here's the last slide. I'm going to stop here. We're going to talk about what we learned from 31 listening sessions. These are community engagement sessions around the region. We held 16 in those communities you're seeing there, and we held 15 online to make it accessible for this broad, vast geographic territory. And I'm going to stop sharing now, and we're going to talk about what we did and why we did it. All right. So, all right. I should have stopped sharing. Is that okay? Can you see us? All right. So, what we're doing, I want us to step back and take a look at the context here. We have a really exciting time in this region's history, a once in a generation opportunity, a historic opportunity to really stand up for these waters. And under the leadership of the Ohio River Basin Alliance, we're putting together a plan, as Chris mentioned, to restore and protect the waters of the region. And this is a plan that hopefully will put the Ohio River Basin on the map, so to speak. The federal government every year invests millions and millions of dollars to restore and protect our nation's great waters, from the Great Lakes to the Chesapeake, Puget Sound, Long Island Sound, the Gulf Coast. And we would like to see a federal investment accelerate progress in tackling some of the challenges in this region. And so what we're here to talk about is like how we're doing that. And we're looking to put together a plan, and there are 3 legs of what we're doing to that. We're looking at a technical work group. I see some folks on the call today who've been involved in that, a technical work group, a multi-stakeholder work group that looks at what are the problems. So there's a technical component of this plan. Number 2, there's a tribal component. This region has 2 federally recognized tribes still in the region, and there are dozens of tribes whose ancestral lands are the Ohio River Valley, and we want to honor tribal conservation priorities. And the last leg of the stool are community priorities. What do people care about? What are they concerned about? What do they want to see done to solve those? One principle of our democracy is that people impacted by a problem need to have a seat at the table so they can be a part of the solution. And what we're looking to do, and what this whole endeavor looked to do, was engage communities, to engage neighborhoods, to engage residents and say, hey, what are your clean water concerns? What are your pollution concerns? Number 1. And number 2, like, what do you like to see done about it? What are some solutions? Like, here's what is happening in other parts of the country. Do you support that here? And so what we did, as you saw in that slide, is in 2022 and 2023, we held 31 listening sessions, both in communities and online, to get at that information. What do communities care about? What are they concerned about? And what do they see done about that? And that information that we're here to talk about today is being woven into that plan that Chris just talked about, that Richard Harrison, the executive director of the Ohio River Basin Alliance, or SANCO, the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission, and I are working collaboratively on, as well as a whole bunch of other stakeholders. So what do people care about, and how can we weave that in the plan? And that's what we're here to talk about today. And so what we did is we went to those communities and asked those 2 questions. What are you concerned about? And what do you want to do about it? And I think, as you saw in some of those pictures, these were open conversations, open invitations. I will say that part of these conversations happened during some of the more sort of difficult parts of the pandemic. So as you saw, we hosted a lot of these outdoors in 2022, and we've gradually moved those indoors. So we worked at state parks and gazebos and boat houses in the case of Louisville. And so it was really, I think, an invigorating process, an invigorating discussion. I think a lot of times people give lip service to, like, what do people think, as a check the box exercise. And I want to give a lot of credit to the Ohio River Basin Alliance, who really prioritized and supported and honored the sort of difficult task of soliciting input from communities. It's time consuming, but I think it is really invaluable, and to not do it would be a huge liability for this plan. So as I mentioned, there are 3 parts to the stool that will be woven into the plan: the technical component, the tribal component, the community engagement component. And this webinar will address specifically that last component. What do people think? And in a nutshell, people really care. Oftentimes we hear that the people are out of touch, they don't know, they don't care about the environment. I would say that's really not true. I think there are all sorts of issues that people deal with in their daily lives, from paying their rent or their mortgage to getting their kids to school, to putting food on the table. There are a lot of concerns people have in their daily lives. But when you ask about water and the environment and clean air and healthy communities, people really care. They're passionate, they're concerned, and that's a lot of what we heard in communities big and small. I think you saw on that slide, we went to large communities, small communities, and everything in between, and people really turned out to talk about what they care about. I'm going to give you a few takeaways. I'll give you 8 takeaways, and then I think we're going to turn it over to Heather and Tanner to talk a little about what they heard in their communities, and we're going to open up some questions. Like, number one, people really care and they're really concerned, and clean water and drinking water dominates those concerns. As people may recall, like, this is PFAS, ground zero for PFAS. I think you saw some photos in that slide from Marietta, Ohio, where PFAS and toxic pollution and chemicals dominated that conversation. People care about drinking water. They care about it in their municipal systems. They care about on their well water. They're concerned about threats that they know about, and they're concerned about threats that could occur, which is why I'll get to in a second. Like, that's a major concern. And as part of those threats they see around them, they see this impacting not only their drinking water, but their quality of life. They see this as potentially a barrier to access for recreation, a barrier to, we have fish consumption advisories up and down the river. And so this impacts not just human health, but human recreation and economic well-being for a lot of folks. The second thing I like to point out, people don't think polluters are being held accountable. People see this clearly in, like, the PFAS issue. I think it's a lot of these listening sessions occurred between the East Palestine train derailment and that episode, which spilled some really nasty stuff into that community, really highlighted some of the concerns about chemical pollution and preventing spills and preventing contamination. So people want to see people held accountable. People understand that this region as a whole really was developed based on a manufacturing and industrial base. So we know pollution can come with that, but part of that responsibility is preventing contaminating neighborhoods, whether it be in your community or downstream. Number three, people, when they learn more about what's happening across the country with investments in the Great Lakes and the Chesapeake, they want that in this geography, which makes sense. They support things like habitat restoration, and they support things like confronting invasive species and managing invasive species. They support things like farm conservation programs that pay farmers to take action to protect soil and water quality. And they support things like updating infrastructure, water infrastructure, drinking water and wastewater and stormwater infrastructure to sort of prevent and protect communities. I will also say, we'll get to in a second, but flooding is a major concern. This is the Ohio River Valley, and valleys don't really do well with increased rain and with some of the precipitation patterns people are already seeing. They're concerned about that. They're concerned about loss of life, loss of property, loss of economic well-being, as flooding can be devastating. Number four, people want to see laws updated and enforced to make sure that we are not exacerbating pollution and contributing new pollution. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but I think that one of the major takeaways from this, if I had to put it in a nutshell, is that people support restoration, cleaning up past abuses. Equally, if not more important, that people are preventing new harms. So we both have to protect and restore if we're going to sort of do the right thing for communities. Number five, this was also sort of a major salient point with people, is people see these investments as an economic driver, and they want local communities to benefit. They want job training and workforce development programs, so that when we do get to work of restoring and protecting the waters of this 14-state region, we're hiring local workers, we're hiring local businesses, we're hiring local contractors. If that means skills training needs to be supported, then they're all for that. They want to see this as a long-term economic solution. Just like when you restore rivers and streams and tributaries and habitat, you're supporting outdoor recreation opportunities, you're supporting outdoor recreation access, you're supporting small businesses. They see, and people see, local economic benefit to also having the skills to improve water infrastructure, to sort of operate and maintain water infrastructure, to restore wetlands and whatnot. So a big economic driver, and people see that as an important thing. Number six, people see increased access to information and data as essential, not just so they have warning about potentially health-threatening pollution, but they can also make wise decisions at the local level that are environmentally sound. And importantly, they can hold officials accountable. I think that was also a major theme, that they want to make sure that people are held accountable, and officials and decision makers are held accountable, just as polluters are held accountable. So we tighten up pollution, we prevent pollution, and we protect the health of communities. I think I alluded to this, but people also understand that not all communities are impacted in the same way by pollution. There are communities that live smack dab in the middle of a Superfund site. There are communities that are more prone to flooding. There are communities that don't have a tax base to pay for infrastructure that would help prevent pollution or prevent flooding or whatnot. So people see the need to help communities that have maybe drawn the short end of the stick and disproportionately face not only pollution, but the health impacts, the economic impacts, and recreation impacts from that. And lastly, people, I mentioned flooding earlier, people really want to see this go hand in hand with confronting and helping communities prepare for the impacts of climate change, and flooding is foremost on that list. So that was a pretty quick run through of 8 of the top takeaways. There's a lot of information under each one of those, and we can probably get to that in the Q&A. But I want to really quickly say that this information is, as I mentioned at the outset, being taken seriously. We've heard loudly and clearly the concerns and priorities of local communities, and that information is being woven into the plan, so that the plan that is released and is delivered to Congress is scientifically sound. It is broad and visionary. It also really encompasses and centers the community-driven priorities that people care about. So we all have access to clean, safe, and affordable water. We all have access to wonderful outdoor recreational experiences, and we all have healthy and vibrant communities. So thank you, Chris. I'll turn it over to you, and we'll go to my co-panelists. We'll be happy to take questions when the time comes.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. Very exciting, and we're certainly happy at Orba to have Jordan's experience working on this, and also the resources with the National Wildlife Federation as well. Much appreciated. And we're grateful for Heather and Tanner as well for their involvement with the listening sessions, as well as their involvement with Orba. Heather Sprouse comes from a long line of West Virginians. Now the co-owner of a small farm, she holds a bachelor's and master's degree in sociology from Marshall University. Dr. Somerville will be proud of that. He's on the line, where she focused on community and leadership development. Heather is the Ohio River Coordinator with West Virginia Rivers Coalition, where she works with communities to amplify their clean water visions while creating pathways to restoration and protection. And Heather's going to give us some insights and her thoughts about her experiences with the listening sessions. Thank you, Heather.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, and for that great overview. Jordan, I'm so glad to be here and for the opportunity to talk about such an important issue. So like they said, I'm Heather Sprouse. I'm the Ohio River Coordinator with the West Virginia Rivers Coalition. I live between Huntington and Charleston, and I was born in West Virginia, married into a small farm family, and have been in love with the land for as long as I can remember. Our organization, the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, was founded in the late 80s. It was founded by paddlers who recreated in the headwaters of West Virginia that noticed increasing harms to the watershed. So since then, we've kept our focus on protecting source water and have expanded to all corners of the state. We champion community science and have trained hundreds of stream monitoring volunteers. We protect our public lands, and one of my jobs is to help communities engage in the environmental permitting process and become advocates themselves. Our work in the Ohio River Valley is new. I'm the first full-time staff member to do this work for the West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and it's a big job because 80% of our state is within the Ohio River watershed. And so while I work primarily on oil and gas issues, I also get to work on protecting wildlife and supporting recreation, and with this project, advocating for resources to increase quality of life for communities throughout the watershed. I draw inspiration from the Chesapeake Choose Clean Water Coalition. We're the state lead for that group. Unlike the Ohio River watershed, the Chesapeake Bay touches many states. Collectively, the Choose Clean Water Coalition has championed federal restoration funding and implementation of a region-wide ecosystem plan. And in a peer-reviewed study, it's estimated that a fully implemented restoration plan will continue to generate billions of dollars per year for the economy of the Chesapeake Bay region. These economic benefits are provided by increases to the natural benefits of a healthy ecosystem. And these benefits include everything from protection from flooding through investments in water management infrastructure. It includes more productive farmlands from conservation practices that help farmers make improvements to their land management practices. It also includes additional financial support for the state revolving funds that provide low interest loans and grants to local governments for clean water infrastructure projects that reduce pollution. It adds enhancements to the public drinking water supply, including affordable hookups for fresh water to homes as well as farmlands. And it supports technology and expertise for river monitoring, which has allowed them to expand early detection systems for problems that impact their watershed. So one of my first tasks in this role at West Virginia Rivers was to join Jordan for the 3 in-person listening sessions that occurred in June of 2022. I'd been in my position for less than a month, and our tour began in Wheeling before we made our way down to Parkersburg via Marietta and then to Huntington. And a few months later, I also joined Jordan and Williamson. Each community had a clear top priority that emerged from these conversations. And while they were all different, the needs in general overlapped. In Wheeling, I heard that flood resilience is the most pressing need. Each person had a story about how much worse the flooding has become and how it impacts them. One anecdote that sticks out is from a man who told us that he watches the forecast and at least once a year carries his hot water tank out of his basement and up into the upper floors of his home to prevent floodwaters from damaging it. So the need for climate resilient strategies are clear. It was also at this listening session that I first met members of the Wheeling Creek Watershed Alliance, a group that I continue to work with. I've now seen their litter guards and signs about the watershed that they've installed in town. I've read about their goals for revitalizing the water trail along Wheeling Creek. And I've heard them vision projects like riparian buffers and tree plantings. Federal restoration funds could support their work. So we were in Marietta, just across the river from Parkersburg, when I learned how inseparable those communities are. And it was these folks that taught me that the Ohio River is really a false border. It connects us more than it separates us. At this listening session, PFAS contamination rose to the top early. People know that it's a problem. Many of them don't know what to do about it. And most people have a heartbreaking story of a friend or loved one who has suffered serious health harms thought to be attributed to this problem. This message is especially poignant to me right now as the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection has drafted a permit to allow an additional production line for manufacturing and disposing of Gen-X chemicals into the Ohio River in the Parkersburg area. So at this listening session, I first met members of the Mid-Ohio Valley Climate Action Volunteer Association. This is a passionate, dedicated group that is succeeding in keeping the conversation around climate humming in this area. And I continue to be impressed by their successful youth engagement, a program that teaches self-directed project management. Federal restoration funding could support their work. In Huntington, the main issue I heard is an outdated combined sewer system that regularly overflows in high rain events. The Fort Pole Creek Watershed Association is led by professionals who are volunteering on their off hours to help plan and identify funding for faster solutions. It was one of their members, an engineer, who showcased to me a study that shows an area that would be effective for prioritizing drainage and flow controls because there's a problem caused by poor planned development of a big business park upstream that now leads to regular flooding downstream in a residential area. Fort Pole Creek also distributes grant funds for upgrading failing septic systems along Fort Pole Creek, and I see that federal restoration funds could support their work. So Williamson was a new community for me, and we attended the listening session there a few months after the initial 3. There was a huge turnout. The Friends of the Tug Fork River is a watershed association that has over 20,000 subscribers on Facebook, and this is in southern West Virginia. I was struck by the pride in this community and the care that these folks show for their river and the hard work that they're putting into restoring and protecting their local water. And I mean hard work. Their volunteers have pulled out and disposed of over 13,000 tires from the Tug Fork River. They have young people on their board of directors and are in the process of completing a watershed improvement plan. Federal restoration funds could support their work too. So when I first met with these 4 communities, sitting in their parks and eating pizza together, it was clear that folks are emboldened to dream bigger when invited to feel a connection with the 25 million people who share the watershed with them. And so now working alongside these communities, they've taught me what an equitable future for this region could look like. So I'm really excited we're at this point in the process. I look forward to continuing to work with the Ohio River Basin Alliance, the National Wildlife Federation, and community groups across our 14-state region to help achieve this vision. Thanks, and I'll pass it back to Chris and Tanner.
Thank you, Heather. Very, very passionate people. It sounds like very powerful stories, and probably provided you with inspiration for your work as well. So thank you for sharing all that. And Tanner's going to share some of his experiences as well. Tanner, yes, was raised by scientists and grew up paddling, biking, and hiking, maybe alongside Brewster Rhodes and the Ohio Riverway folks. After earning a degree in ecology, he worked on a fishing vessel in the Bering Sea. His Peace Corps service involved resource management and ecotourism, something we hope to bring to the Valley. During graduate school, Tanner helped form Greater Cincinnati's Tri-State Trails Coalition. He is a National Park Service Mountains to Main Street Ambassador, Shift Emerging Leader, and recipient of the 2018 Murray Center Rising Leader Award. Tanner is a co-founder of Groundwork Ohio River Valley. Tanner has led the creation of one of the nation's largest youth green workforce programs and brought climate-safe neighborhoods to Cincinnati. Yes's passion is creating new pathways for diverse youth to access green corridors. So like Jordan, like Heather, we're really grateful to have Tanner working with us, and take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. Really excited, particularly to speak with Jordan and Heather about this effort that's been going on since 2022 and continuing to share all those updates with you. And first of all, I want to thank NWF for leading this. And I think the best way to put it is that they have stepped up by stepping back, particularly as it relates to environmental justice, which I want to talk a lot about today. The first place to start, of course, in any reciprocal relationship is listening. And NWF, along with partners, big and small, and that we've unearthed non-traditionally part of these type of conservation movements, have done an amazing job accumulating the stories and the data that has led to the report that Jordan, I'm sure, will share with everyone and that we will use to champion this effort to Congress. So thank you, NWF, and all the partners. But I want to touch on centering environmental justice and equity as my reflection is maybe our part of the listening sessions. So environmental justice is certainly a buzzword. I'm sure there's all sorts of familiarity or not familiarity of it with the folks here, depending on your life experience and depending on what you do for work, et cetera. But I think as scientists or folk in the industry, we tend to get pretty caught up in the data and the things we know in our echo chamber or our silos about the Ohio River and the water quality and the ecological restoration that needs to be done. But it's helpful, and this process has stepped back and centered on people of all sorts and stripes and backgrounds, but definitely putting people at the center of this, because we know to champion what would be an appropriation or a lot of funding or restoration, it has to come from the ground up, particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act and the ARPA funding, BIL, and all this money that's flying around the federal government, something called J40, Justice 40, wherein 40% of all this money needs to go to underserved populations. Environmental justice becomes extremely important. So our foundation, I want to assure you, particularly from my experience, has been that of true listening and equity as it relates to starting with those who are most impacted or will be impacted from things like climate change, landslides, flooding, et cetera. So with that context, I think it also helps to think globally and also hyper local. And when we talk about climate change, some of the nuance and some of the things I want to introduce maybe will be shocking, you might not agree with, but I would love the challenge and questions and feedback, but also to potentially think about ways in which we tackle this global climate crisis. And it's pretty simple at the end of the day, right? We have to save the world. The thing that's not so simple, I think, is that we can do that incorrectly. Yes, we could cut enough emissions and get to our goals, et cetera, and curb the climate crisis. But within this crisis, of course, is an opportunity to undo a lot of historic wrongs as it relates to redlining, racism, segregation, discrimination, what have you, for underserved or less represented groups. And so the right solution in the right places is what we're so passionate about. And that, again, gets back to the equity and environmental justice of this. So it's not just saying, okay, let's clean everything up, let's preserve what we can preserve. It really focuses on restoration. And for us, that starts with Indigenous practice. It's restoration of mind, body, land, and soul, so that we're creating projects and solutions that are connecting with those, again, who have been left behind for so long. And certainly our environmental movement needs that update as a community in conservation, because I think we have an unsustainable sustainability movement, right, as it relates to inclusivity. So again, this process has been super inclusive and super hard. Jordan has driven around the watershed 10 times over, I think, and we haven't talked to everybody, of course, and we're still open to more folks and more voices, but this is a great attempt and a great effort right now. And some of the challenges I think you'll find around that, and when you speak to such diverse audiences, is the nuance in messaging. So I'll say something that might be controversial as well. From our listening session, I would say that clean water, clean air, these are not the goals of what we're going for or what we've heard. And if you're a grant writer, you might identify with this. Those are the outcomes. So outcome of all the things we're doing that may start human-centric or project-centric will lead to clean water, clean air, carbon emissions, et cetera. But that's not how we're going to reach the hearts and minds of everyone. We need to, of course, talk about green jobs, the economy, flooding, basement backups, combined stormwater. These are things that have touch points with folks' everyday lives. And we have to find the solutions within the climate crisis, within the economy, to address them. So just as Heather went into some anecdotes and some data from our listening sessions, which we held in Cincinnati, here in the lower Mill Creek. The Mill Creek is quite infamous. At one time, it was declared the most polluted urban waterway by American Rivers. And us and many groups have done a lot of great work to keep to flip that narrative. And Bruce Terry knows all about that. However, there's still a lot of combined sewer overflows. There's still a lot of backup landslides, overland flooding, and you have situations where residents are building rain barrels, which are great, but they're living under a giant hillside that is crumbling. And of course, one rain barrel or thousands of them can't do anything about that. So the main priorities in our listening session in this area, which is mostly low income, mostly minority and of that African American, but other racial types, was affordable housing, which is something you might not think of when you think of the Ohio River. And then second, above all the infrastructure, above clean water, drinking water, sewage, was the trust about this. They know what's going on. Our communities have been studied to death, and we've done listening sessions over and over and over. And the accountability that comes along with that has rarely been backed up by continuing to come and report on what's going on. And furthermore, as Jordan mentioned, the health and wealth that stays in our community. So groundwork, as Chris said, we have one of the largest youth green workforces in the country. Our best formation is if we're doing resident-led projects and priorities, and we're keeping that health and wealth in our communities through green workforce, business incubation, also with young adults that are in line with the emerging green economy. So when I say clean water and clean air are not the goals, I'm being a bit flippant, but what I mean is the restoration of something like a large brownfield or a toxic site in our neighborhoods can be turned into a huge positive when you look at the climate crisis and then single in on a certain parcel or something, because that represents jobs, that represents transformation, not just of the land, but of the folks, the young people or not young people that are getting trained to restore this area. And then we're talking about economy, quality of life, et cetera, and we're all realizing those goals. So affordable housing, the trust, the money, particularly with the government, if all this money is coming, how is it going to be passed down? in an equitable way. And then after that, we get to drinking water and combined sewer overflow. And the solutions, the top 3 solutions for our listening session were workforce development, homeowner assistance, particularly as you think about gentrification. There have been a lot of projects that have great intentions, and something that's so close to my heart, of course, are biking and walking trails, but projects like that lead to development or gentrification. How do we help folks in their homes now with more than just rain barrels, but that's solar panels to alleviate energy burden, or that's homeowner assisted that they've identified, and then youth engagement. So those were the top 3 concerns in our Cincinnati Lower Mill Creek session, and the top 3 solutions. So I will stop there because I'm sure there's some questions, but Chris, I'll leave it to you or Jordan.
Thank you, Tanner. Great comments, and particularly appreciate your emphasis on environmental justice. Jordan has said throughout our ORBA meetings just how important environmental justice and the social equity piece of this plan is, and it's unique in some regard from other restoration plans, and taking that account. Really, this is a quality of life enhancement plan, and it'll be done in a variety of ways with social equity certainly at the forefront. And just to put the bigger context on this, these listening sessions are supporting the restoration plan that has been worked on for the past couple years at the least. And as Jordan mentioned, he has a technical group, over 100 scientists and other agency folks working on the science behind ecological restoration, working closely with the tribal communities and then the communities along the river and throughout the basin. So we're going to open it up for Q&A. Heather has a question about that permit you mentioned. People want to know about that. And I'll ask Jordan to just talk about, okay, you have heard these voices, over 535 people plus some, and you've compiled this listening session report. How can we access the report? And then what are you going to do with that information? Like, how is that going to be incorporated into your bigger plan with the restoration goals?
Thanks, Chris. I just put a link. The report we're talking about, you can find that, I think, on ORBA's page. We're just getting this up, so this is hot off the press. So you guys are hearing kind of the first download of all this information. It'll be released publicly probably tomorrow, but you can download the report at the link I just put in the chat. I think it'll also be on ORBA's website. So there's that. So what we're doing is we're methodically going through what we learned from these listening sessions, and we're weaving them into the plan. So for instance, I want to go back to something Tanner said about home ownership and homeowner assistance. Like in a lot of restoration plans you see, you couldn't even find the word in the plan. But it's pretty clear in communities like in Cincinnati, but also in rural communities, a huge barrier for clean water and health is that people can't afford, whether it be lead pipe replacement, whether it be replacing a septic that is now leaching sewage. You know, it's like a $5,000, $8,000, $10,000 investment that a lot of people can't afford, especially when, you know, some statistics say I think upwards of 70% of citizens can't afford a $500 emergency. Like think about like a $7,000 septic. So I think when we think about like what we heard from listening sessions, it's really taking an expansive view of what does restoration look like for fish and wildlife and habitat and for people and communities. And so that means things like an emphasis on how you help that both individual homeowners or smaller communities, and things like how do you encourage local economies? How do you get, you know, a local restoration driven economy that's sustainable and not like one and done? Like I'll just give one example. In a lot of communities, but especially smaller communities, we're having a huge transition in the water utility workforce. Whereas baby boomers retire from a lot of sectors, they're leaving both opportunities, but a lot of jobs to fill. Well, in some smaller communities where you have smaller utilities anyway, and they're having a hard time finding workers, like how do you do that when you have this big exodus in the next 10 years of between a third and 2/3 of the water utility workforce walking out the door? Well, like Tanner said and Heather said, like that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. Like we can be giving people really strong, powerful, well-paying jobs in these local communities while restoring water quality, while improving public health, and while strengthening communities. So I think what we're doing is really taking what we've heard to heart both things that we maybe expect, like habitat restoration and riparian restoration and farm conservation, but also things that maybe either we didn't expect or we didn't know how powerful it would be emphasized. And so that's where I think it's both exciting and somewhat daunting, but we'll be weaving that into the plan. And the goal is to get that out this year before the summer. So we'll be putting this out for public comment so people can sort of look at it, they can weigh in on it. Hopefully we're getting most things right, but if we're missing some things, we want to know that. But there should be a really strong connection between the report link that I just said and the final report that you're going to see with the restoration plan that does weave in these other, like the technical components, the tribal components, and the community components. I think that's a really strong three-legged stool for this plan to sit on. And we're really excited about it. And that's coming your way in the next 4 months or so.
Thank you very much. Again, you can access that report via the link in the chat, but we'll have it up on the ORBA website soon, and then we can distribute that as well to those on our listserv. Dr. Somerville, longtime biology professor, microbiologist who spent years traveling up and down literally the entire stretch of the river, also served as dean at Marshall, is currently the executive director of ORBCRE, the Ohio River Basin Consortium for Research and Education that focuses on 200 plus colleges and universities around the nation, around the basin. He asked Heather a question, and that is, has anybody challenged that permit related to PFOS and the Gen-X chemicals? And then he also asked Tanner, do you know if higher ed can play a role in helping to increase the access and accessibility equity for the marginalized populations? So Heather, you want to go first?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Chuck. So I'd be happy to dive into the weeds about this permit. To anyone who'd like to offline, I'll put my email address in the chat. I can say that the folks at the Mid-Ohio Valley Climate Action that I mentioned have become wonderful allies in championing for clean water priorities. And it's a little bit outside of their purview, so I appreciate their partnership a lot. And a dozen of their members submitted comment deadline extension requests to give us more time. So that's kind of where we're at in the process right now. We're talking with technical experts and still kind of feeling into the way that the community wants to approach this, but there is a lot of concern. This is moving backwards. This is not the direction that our communities want to be moving in. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk further with anyone about this.
Thank you. And Tanner, can you address Dr. Somerville's question about, can universities and colleges play a role in helping to engage and increase access to these populations?
Thank you for the question, Dr. Somerville. The answer is, of course, yes, but let me caveat my answer with my bias and experience, meaning that, of course, I have only worked with the folks I've worked with and only experienced what I've experienced, and that does not speak for every academic institution, et cetera. So while I say yes, I think there's been a lot of historic harm with this relationship as it relates to, you heard me say, our communities have been studied to death, et cetera. We have particularly academic institutions, excuse the fly, coming in and out, doing reports, doing mapping, doing data, doing metrics for their classes or their thesis, and it's ad nauseam, right? It's become quite a barrier to engagement work, because then if myself or groundworker, and if whoever comes in says we want to do a listening session, we already have this foundation of people have come here and poked and pried us for so long, and we've never seen anything out of it. So to do it right requires flipping the narrative and coming in with a set of values and or deliverables that you're ready to act on. Classes are particularly tough to get students to come in and dream up, amazing schematics of this and that are never going to happen. But if you as a researcher or a professor, whatever it may be, are there with some resources to offer, particularly just starting a baseline of honoring people for their time with payment. This is a practice that not just us, but many are doing in the equity space and NWF. That's great to honor their time, perspective. It's also, I think, something we're finding as a community. That's also not enough. It's not enough to get people to care about things, and it's also not enough for us as a practitioner to say, hey, we gave you $100. That's, we can wipe our hands with it and that's done. So to get people to really care, this whole effort and the whole climate or however opportunity, if you will, is an exercise in psychology and mind shifting and connecting these issues that we know are important to people's quality of life and everyday life and hierarchy of needs. That's the important thing, coming with the follow through, whether that be monetary or just continuing to engage and being a constant presence in that community. That's what's important. So I say yes, particularly as we do need the data, but the qualitative side of this is so important. So showing that you honor their perspective, their frontline experience, and putting the qualitative with the quantitative. For us, we do it in a way called climate safe neighborhoods. Again, as Heather said, I'd be happy to talk about, or you can, I'm sure, find it out there online. But it pairs all of that into policy, into action. So thanks for the question, and forgive me for painting some of my experience on it.
No, those experiences and insights are excellent, Tanner. Knowing Chuck, one of the most compassionate, genuine, authentic guys, he's a perfect sort of bridge to higher education and working with communities. We would benefit from working with you, Tanner, and your experience on how best to approach that. And Jen put something related in the chat, and Jen is the chair of the Knowledge for Informed Decisions for ORBA and part of this discussion series. She's with the Ohio University Voinovich School. And Jen, can you share what you put in the chat?
Sure. Thanks. And Jordan, you mentioned the HSTS issue, so I was just my wheels are spinning here because I work with some of our local health departments who receive funds from Ohio EPA through the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund each year to help low-income families to replace, upgrade their HSTS system. And it is a forgiveness loan. So if you are at 100% of the poverty, the HHS poverty guideline, they're going to pay for 100% of that upgrade. And then from 100 to 200, 85%, and 300%, that's 50% that they'll pay. So it is a pretty sizable amount that low-income folks can get their systems completely renovated and replaced in Ohio. And sometimes those counties, and almost every county in Ohio participates, they don't use all those funds. And so it is a great way to funnel folks to their health department, which is a scary step. But if they are within those poverty guidelines, they're going to get that funded through that program. So it's worth to check into the health department.
Excellent.
Thanks, Jen. Can I just piggyback on that? And I think that's an excellent point. A lot of states have similar programs. I know the federal EPA is also making a real priority of getting homeowner assistance out there for things like septics or private water wells. I think that the two issues that come to mind, and this sort of gets at why community engagement is so vital, is a lot of homeowners and communities don't even know these programs exist. So how do we create bridges between the programs that are available with the communities who need them the most? And I think that's where, to Tanner's point about Justice 40, I think that's where the federal agencies are really working to help solidify some of those connections, where we, both in the Ohio River Restoration Plan and we as sort of passionate clean water advocates, we can help create those bridges. And as Tanner mentions, resource those so that it's not all volunteer time. We are helping people. We're getting them where they need to be. The burden isn't only on them. We're sharing that and helping. And I would say the second thing is, there was so much to get into from the listening session report. I encourage people to download the link and take a look at it. We'll also be getting some more information out about that. But I'd say one of the huge issues is a lot of federal programs require some sort of matching requirement, right? And so I think for a lot of communities that don't have the tax base, that have a big population of lower income folks, just the match, even though it could be you're getting $3 on the dollar, well, getting that first dollar to match is really hard. And so I think increasingly what we're seeing, not just in this region, but across the country, is a movement to really having grants rather than loans. Because even some of those more generous low interest loans are still somewhat untenable for many communities. So whether it's on the homeowner level, whether it's on the small community level, or even larger communities, we're really looking to see if we can transition a lot of federal investments as grants rather than loans, much as it was in the 70s, where one of the big catalysts for change was not just the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act and other foundational environmental laws, but it was the fact that the federal government was infusing billions of dollars of grant money into communities to help update our water infrastructure. And now as the communities have taken on more of the burden, in the 70s, I think the federal government, for every dollar, I think the government was putting up upwards of 65 to 75% of the money, and local communities the rest. Well, now local communities are putting upwards of 90% of the money, and that cost burden on local communities is becoming crushing. So things like the program, Jen, you mentioned, and other programs, I think getting those on more advantageous financial agreements, meaning loans grants rather than loans, can really help not just the homeowner level, but the community level to get help where it's needed most.
Thank you. Heather, Tanner, can you guys speak to maybe how do we keep these folks engaged? Like, in other words, how do we continue to listen to their voices, keep them updated so that's not a one-off, as I'm sure that they understand it's not, but how can we continue the dialogue moving forward? And then I'll ask Jordan to give us a overview of the next steps with regards to the restoration plan and how we may be engaging folks in Congress to help us in our efforts. So Heather, Tanner, any ways that we can continue to engage and even enhance our communication with folks along the river and throughout the basin?
I can jump in first, Tanner. And I'll say that something I've learned in the 2 years I've been doing community engagement work in this region is that the strongest way to really invest in a relationship is to figure out what folks are already working on, what groups already exist, and invest in the work that they're doing. And so a lot of them have, like I mentioned, the Friends of the Tug Fork, 20,000 people on Facebook. I think that it's, seeing if it's appropriate to tap into existing networks that exist. I do know we're going to be doing like some webinars and in-person presentations of the listening session. I think that's really great as well. But I just really think that any way that we can play to the strengths of communities and the capacities that already exist and just reaching folks where they're excited, really by investing in the projects the folks are already doing, is the way forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the question. There's a lot to it. And I'll just start by everybody here in this chat, et cetera. We are a continuum of partnerships, all of us that occupy different levels or roles or spaces. And we all have our mission, but obviously we're probably joined up on some of the main key values. Now it's the messaging and the nuance within that we still have room to go, and that we need further engagement, to your point. And just to kind of demystify this community engagement thing, particularly for scientists, as Chris said, my parents are scientists, so I can pick on y'all. It's when we talk about engagement, I don't like to get into the weeds of the strategies or the difficulties. It's really about people, right? In any relationship you have, you're familiar with what works and what doesn't. And when you're reaching out, particularly to folks that haven't been in your sphere or whatever before, it's about showing up. It's about getting uncomfortable. It's about being vulnerable. It's about coming with your arms open, and most importantly, of course, being honest about what you can promise or not. The methods afterwards, as Heather said, is it Facebook group? Is it a newsletter? Is it this? Is it that? Whatever, you know better than I, your communities or potentially the communities you're trying to reach. And Jen just had a perfect example. We have a resource list for our climate safe neighborhoods communities, as I kind of mentioned. That's going to be a perfect thing to put in there to allow people to access. So knowing your role and your niche, is it a medium? Is it an influencer? Is it something you're an aggressor and you want to make something actionable? That's very important. And then just being straight up and honest with your folks about what you can do, and potentially linking them up to others like people in this chat for other resources and things like that. But it's all about any relationship. It's the accountability.
Thank you. Excellent. And then Jordan, if you can give us next steps and maybe talk about the plan and how we can engage Congress to help us.
Yeah, so I'll just say the sausage making is in full swing. Those three parts are we're still working on it. We're still melding those together. And when that plan's ready to come out, it's going to come out, and it is going to be this year. We're aiming for the summer. So, and that's exciting because that will be the draft plan for public review. There'll be a public comment period. We encourage everyone on this call, you're interested to help get the word out. We want to make what hopefully is a very strong plan even stronger. And so that has, I can tell you the work that's gone into this, the diversity of ideas and communities and expertise has absolutely been invaluable. And so keep a lookout for that. We'll obviously let you all know. The second point is, in parallel to putting the plan together, we're working with the Ohio River Congressional Caucus. When we deliver this thing to Congress, it's going to be, the onus will be on Congress to write draft legislation to authorize the federal government to invest the money needed to implement the plan. And they're going to need to write legislation to do that and then get the Congress to pass it. So much like the Great Lakes or Florida Everglades or Chesapeake Bay or Gulf Coast, like, it's going to take the delegates, the elected officials of this region, to come together. We are fortunate to have a bipartisan leadership of the Ohio River Congressional Caucus. I think it's 59 members in the House and, 14 states, 28 members of the Senate. And we're seeing some strong leadership in Ohio. Unfortunately, well, not fortunately for him, he just took a great position. Former Representative Bill Johnson from Marietta, Ohio, is now the president of Youngstown State University. He was a Republican co-chair. The Democratic co-chair is still in the House, a Democrat, Morgan McGarvey from Louisville, Kentucky. And, ORBA has made a top priority. The Ohio River Basin Alliance has made it a top priority to sort of work with, to communicate with, and collaborate with the Ohio River Congressional Caucus. And so what we'll be doing from now until when the plan comes out is continue to give Congress updates on where we are. We'll continue to work with them because it's going to take, no pun intended, but a bad pun's coming your way. Like, they're going to have to carry the water on this. There's a lot of, we're using all these congressional metaphors that we're doing the sausage making. They're going to have to do the horse trading. They're going to have to work with other members of Congress to get what we hope is a multi-million-dollar appropriation every year through Congress. So I think there's a political piece that's going along with this sort of qualitative and quantitative crafting of the restoration plan piece. And it's going to take those pieces working together to sort of get this through Congress and to get this hopefully integrated to every appropriations bill moving forward once we get a bill in place and passed.
Excellent. Thank you. And I'll reiterate, great leadership from the caucus members so far. We want to build the caucus. So those of you who know your reps or feel comfortable reaching out to your reps, to give them a heads up, tell them it's important to you. And we are going to be up on the Hill, May 16th. ORBA is sponsoring the Ohio River Basin Hill Day, where we will be talking with members throughout the basin, House of Representatives, senators, et cetera, to help us advance this work. That's May 16th. But just around the corner, the last Wednesday in February is our next webinar. And if I can ask Nick to put that up, I think he has a slide on our February 28th webinar, which is an important issue throughout the basin, and that's nutrient reduction strategy resources. And Jen Bowman from, again, Ohio University's Voinovich School has pulled together these speakers, and I'll ask Jen to give a brief synopsis of our February webinar.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, so we have Julie Harold from the Indiana State Agricultural Department, who will be speaking about what Indiana's been doing to reduce their nutrients as part of the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force nutrient reduction efforts. And then from Ohio, we'll have Greg Nadgett, who's with the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And in Kentucky, Josiah Fry, who's with the Kentucky Division of Water. So these folks have been instrumental in their states to lead the efforts for nutrient reduction, as all 12 states that are part of that program are working towards a goal of 20% reduction by next year and nearly 50% reduction by 2035. So please join us. It'll be the last Wednesday in February.
Yeah, very important topic among others. And we'd like to thank Heather, Tanner, Jordan again for sharing your experiences, your insights on the listening sessions and how it relates to the bigger picture of increasing the quality of life for communities throughout the region. And we're excited about your work and look forward to the next steps. Thank you, everyone.